exciting episode. I think it's number 8. I'm going to go with it. Of Shoulder to Shoulder, Untold Stories from a Forgotten War, where we tell stories that bridge the Civ-Mil gap. I am one of the co-founders of Grumpy Combat Veteran and Friends Media. I am joined as, well, not always. I said always, but the last episode, you abandoned me. And so then I took control of the car and I drove it right into the ditch. So
you did.
I was able to get somebody out. So I'm joined again. Thank God she didn't abandon me this time.
I wanted to keep it exciting.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And we believe in promoting mental health brains. But in that sense, you need to know that Will then put you on the podcast and put you on blast for it. That's fine.
That's fine. That's
Harper's military course.
That's right. That's right. So how are you doing, Kate? How's everything going?
I'm great. I'm excited to be back. I am really excited about our guest, who
I know.
I chased around your retirement ceremony just so that I could talk to him. And then I launched a podcast just so I could keep asking questions. It's going to be great.
Let's remember, though, he set me up for failure during that retirement because he didn't tell me you're going to be in the audience.
I know.
And so I didn't call you out like I should have.
You didn't thank me for the critical contributions I've made to Will's success.
That's true.
It's okay. I talk about it enough that I think it's just a little grudge. It's one that I'll hold in my heart forever. But
that's fine. That's fine. I can't wait to endure this for as long as this goes on. So, without further ado, let's do the little bio here for Matt Norton. Matt is currently a commander for a intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance group where he commands over 1,100 airmen, doing a bunch of really cool things all over the world. Prior to that, he was also the Deputy Director of Intelligence for Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC. And when you say JSOC, you have to kind of say it low, like JSOC, kind of a whisper like that. But most importantly, this is the key crutch information. Matt Norton is a proud graduate of Texas A&M University.
Wow, that is not where I thought you were going to go.
The greatest university ever in the history of ever. That's totally unbiased. He received his commission from the United States Air Force Officer Training School in August of 2021. He has deployed with Joint Special Operations Task Force in support of Operations Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, which is Afghanistan, Inherent Resolve, which is Iraq, and Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa. He has had a whole lot of really impressive assignments.
It's got a 2-page bio, y'all.
I know, 2-page bio.
It's just bragging
after bragging. Pay me for my service.
I know, exactly. He was a foreign policy fellow at Georgetown University, which is a really, really big deal. He was a squadron commander now. He's just finishing up group command. He was also a Pride graduate of National War College in D.C., which is also a very big deal. So we are very honored to have my former boss, Matt Norton, onto the show. Welcome.
Hey, man, it's great to be here. That bio sounds a lot cooler than it is, and it doesn't get me any respect at home or at work. So
it should, you guys. It has like a headshot on it. It is beautiful.
Oh, see, I like Kate better than Will now.
I get that.
That's understandable. Most people are like that.
Yeah.
I get it. We're really lucky to bring on Matt, and we're going to talk a lot about some of his deployments. We'll talk a little bit about some of the programs that he's put in while in command for mental health for some of his airmen. But before we get into that, when we bring people on that are in the military, I always like to start with the same question. Why'd you join?
Yeah, that's pretty easy, but longer story. So I'm a military brat, which means I was raised by a Air Force fighter pilot. He'll tell you he was the best fighter pilot that ever lived. Right up until he had a real bad day during his second deployment in Vietnam, and he was shot down over Laos. Spent, a couple hours on the ground, and I was blessed that he was picked up by some other, forgotten heroes, Air America. Still kind of a little bit denied of who they are these days, but there's some great Americans who picked him up, brought him home. And so I've always kind of just paid it forward, right? He took good, I had a great life growing up. And so I joined to honor his service and pay it forward for all those people who served before him. And I still do it. I tell people all the time, I joined for 4 years. but I was having so much fun, I forgot that 20 years have gone by. And I keep doing it because I enjoy what I do. I get to serve with awesome people like Will and meet some pretty cool, phenomenal civilians like Kate, who also back us up and make these type of things happen. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on there. So what year did you, what year is it that you commissioned again?
I commissioned in 2001.
2001.
Yeah,
so
I took a little victory
9/11.
lap while I was at A&M. So, I didn't quite graduate on time.
So before 9/11, yes?
Before 9/11, yep.
So where were you when 9/11 happened?
I was sitting in San Angelo, Texas at Goodfellow Air Force Base, a thriving metropolis in the high plains of West Texas. So I remember sitting there watching the planes crash into the towers while sitting at work on casual status and realizing that the future of the career I thought I was going to have had pretty much changed. I don't think any of us knew that it was going to take the next 20 years, but we definitely knew that things were different and we were going to be serving in something unlike anything that we'd seen before.
Wow. So 2001, you commission, you're at Goodfellow doing the casual life, which is not a bad life. And then you start going to school. How quickly from there were you kind of deployed? When was your first deployment?
So for the first couple of years of my career, I actually worked distributed ops, right? So I did things working with the MQ-9 and U-2 remotely. So that was the first couple of years.
Those are drones, people.
Yeah, drones, UAVs, whatever.
UAVs.
And then, so my first deployment wasn't in person, was 2007, fall 2007 to Al Udeid and then forward to Iraq a lot.
Okay. So when you were doing because we just had on a drone, one of my guys who used to do drones he was deployed in place in Creech. Same type of stuff, different type of stuff when you were a young lieutenant?
Yeah, similar type of stuff. He was flying them and I was taking the intelligence off of it and getting it to the guys on the ground or the decision makers to figure out what they were going to do. Some people talk, watching Kill TV for the first probably 3-4 years of my life.
Yeah. I bet that was quite a welcoming into the military. I mean, you were right off the bat, you were down at JSOC, were you at AFSOC?
No, right off the bat, I was actually in Germany working the distributed ops there. So that was my first assignment. And then I came back to the States and did some of the NSA mission. I didn't come into the soft world till about probably 8 years into my career when I first jumped into that side. So first part was all the Kill TV, watching footage. And then the last couple of years of my life, I spent doing working magic boxes and, eavesdropping on people and that kind of stuff on the soft side, special ops side of things.
Yeah. Do you have any questions, Kate?
No, I'm
okay. You're here for
I'm scared of him now.
So all remember, intelligence is a job, not a requirement.
That's right. There you go. Intelligence is a job, not a requirement. There you go. That's true. So what was your first deployment like? How would you describe that to most listeners? They've never deployed before. What is it like as a young officer? You're getting ready to go. What's going through your mind?
Listening to previous podcasts of yours comes to mind. It was hot and it smelled like shit. It was a different world, right? The first couple of years, first deployment was very much removed. And so it wasn't up close and personal. It was kind of above and, to the side of things. And so it wasn't until years later when I started doing the soft stuff that it became close, it became personal. So that first deployment, I think thought it was cool, right? This is what I'd trained for. This is what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until later in my career, after multiple deployments, that you start to realize the burden that it causes you. Those rocks get thrown into your backpack and you start to realize, that, it was fun, but then the mental burdens take toll, the baggage takes toll, and it really starts to add up. And then you start to just ponder, why, what's the impact, and is the impact, worth the toll, right? I used to have a full head of brown hair. Evidently that, gone the way of the dodo, and that happened, after one deployment, actually.
Wow.
I woke up the morning of the bar exam with 27 gray hairs. So I can relate. to that. I have a question. Can I interrupt, Will?
Please.
I I asked this of the last guy who we had on, who also had worked with drones, and he didn't. He had a different answer than you. So I guess what I'm wondering is, was there one moment during service when you started to realize, like, oh, this is actually something that's a little bit heavier than I realized, or was it really just like everything started to add up and your perspective sort of shifted? Like, was there one defining moment, or just more?
For me, there actually was. It was during a deployment to Djibouti, Horn of Africa. Where, we flew on the back of some special ops aircraft, worked some special boxes. But during that, one of those flights in February 2012, we actually lost Ratchet 33, crashed on the way back into the flight line due to some other stuff going on. And it was when I'm standing at the gate to repatriate 4 lost souls, and you're doing that dignified transfer, that you realize that, what we do, isn't easy, right? And as I talk to my flyers, we can't think that it's like getting on a Delta Airlines flight where when you take off, you're guaranteed to land. And that was the moment that it hit. That was the moment, that this happened. And that's when the burden of command and the burden of, what we do really hit. And unfortunately, I'd like to say it was the last, crash or the last loss. It wasn't. But that moment hit. And that was a weird deployment because, we had just done a hostage rescue, saving somebody in Somalia, right? Doing some really cool stuff for some, really bad mojos, rescuing an American. And then here I am 3 months later doing a dignified transfer on a flight line for the loss of one of our own. So you talk about the highs and lows all in one deployment. Yeah, that deployment right there is probably the one that will stick with me forever.
It's I always say it's all fun and games. It's all an adventure and exciting until that happens. And mine was on my first deployment when our turret gunner was killed by a sniper, and it'll hit you right there, right then, that like, oh, well, this is real, and you can understand that, and people can tell you that until it blew in the head, and like you're like, okay, yeah. The guy with the rank on keeps on telling me this is real, but like, what does he know? He's old, whatever. And well, then it happens. It changes your life, like you said.
I think one of the things that I'm always struck by when I talk to veterans is that that there will be highs and lows, but you don't quite understand how extreme they can be and how rapid they can be. Like, even you're talking, Colonel Norton, like about, it was just a matter of a couple of months before you had these really important moments in your military career, and it can happen in the course of like a day. And how do you recover from whiplash like that? Because even the high moments, like those, can feel a little chaotic for people. And so I think a lot of people, when I talk to them about their military service, and they talk about all of those highs and lows, like it takes a lot of emotional bandwidth that I think that people don't necessarily think of when they first join.
Well, and most of us are very good at compartmentalizing it, right? I denied it for years, ignored when my family was telling me stuff was going on, ignoring when I was drinking too much, or, ignoring it all because I'm like, hey, I'm just waiting for the next high when I deploy again. I get to kill some bad people who deserve it, and it'll all be good. And then it wasn't till years later when I was in command of a squadron down in Florida that all of a sudden I started talking with our embedded psych, and I realized, shit, there's a lot to unpack here. There's a reason when I'm sitting alone in the dark that things are starting to not make sense to me. And then, Will and I had lots of conversations when I was his commander on the same stuff. And, he's one of the ones who drove me back to talking to people again. Matter of fact, I think we saw the same person for a while there. So God bless her, because she's put up with both of our crazy asses.
We'll send her this episode as a mark of gratitude.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just, Djibouti is when we talk about the Horn of Africa type of stuff here, this is the first time we've kind of talked about it on this podcast. When you look at the war on terrorism, people automatically only go to either two places, Iraq or Afghanistan, right? But that Djibouti is a very, very strategic place, right? And there's a lot of competition. If you could just kind of, at the 30,000 foot level, what is so important about the Horn of Africa for people, because they might not understand that?
Yeah. So with Djibouti, right, it's kind of sits there at the crossroads. When we take off, you'd fly north, and we were fighting the Houthis, before they overthrew Yemen. And, we're seeing in the news right now what they were doing. And they were doing terrorist camps like crazy and exporting those folks, all over the Middle East. They were funneling weapons down into Somalia that's had a history of problems, right? But we were trying to help Somalia get, its act together. We were sponsoring our own, just like, Will's been through, talked about. We were sponsoring our own warlords there, hoping that they were better than the warlords we were fighting. But when you look at the terrorist groups across that part of Africa, Al Qaeda was down there. There were a bunch of different terrorist groups that were still flowing throughout the Africa portion that could either go north or causing their own problems. You look at the coal bombing, you look at the embassy bombings that we had a couple years prior to that. We talk about Iraq and Afghanistan; those are the easy ones. But there's a lot of stuff going on in the Horn of Africa and North Africa, that were just as dangerous.
Do you think that was intentional, that when we were talking about the war on terror to people, we kind of kept it to Afghanistan and Iraq? Like, do you think that we did that on purpose?
I think the narrative was probably easier to sell there.
Okay. And
because of the scale, you couldn't deny it, right? So that the Iraq and the Afghanistan, the scale was there, that it got a lot more attention, whereas it was a little bit more surgical, or it was a little bit more special operations focused, and you didn't have the same numbers. But if you look where Djibouti sits, right? That's right through the passageway that you use to go up into the canal and then cross in. So we lose that access there. And also, as we're seeing right now with everything going on, it's a crucial gateway, if you will.
So I want to kind of highlight a comment you made. You said something about we're hoping that our warlords are better than theirs. And it's kind of interesting because today we're filming this on 22 May. The New York Times published this about 10,000 word essay, investigative reporting on this Kandahar character named General Abdul Razik, who is a former chief of police. I knew him. Interesting guy. And so they did this expose, and they're like, look at all the bad stuff he did. And he did a lot of bad stuff. He wasn't nobody that was going to control Kandahar was going to, be in our image. And so I kind of want to kind of highlight that, because for a lot of American service members, they were put in situations where they don't have the choices to be like, we'll take them and not these people. A lot of times that selection has been made for you by other people, and those are the allies that you get. And so it's just not in Afghanistan, it's all over the place. Mm-hmm. Has that been your experience? I mean, wherever you go, you're going to be dealing with people that sometimes aren't going to share your values.
No, 100%. And I think you got to look at, people who grew up in these parts of the world had different experiences than all of us did when we were, younger. It's a different world. And so, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, to use that quote. War's dirty. We had to have friends that didn't do things the way we did, but they got after the same problems we did. And so, it made some strange bedfellows. And I think, looking back, it's easy to say we shouldn't have partnered with certain people and they were evil and they were bad. But at the time, when you don't have a lot of friends, you sometimes take the friends you can get, as long as their rifles are aimed the same direction yours are.
I mean, it helped us win World War II with Stalin. So,
yeah.
I have another question, and this is something, Will, that you have. I like the way that you laugh before I ask each question. Like you're a little scared, and you should be, because
that's right.
This is something that you've talked to me about, and it's something that as a civilian I have really struggled to relate to. But it's a point that you have returned to frequently, which is that when you are sometimes in the military, that notion of killing people is not something that's just inherently negative. Like there are times where even it could be an enjoyable experience. And I'm not putting words in your mouth. I just think that sometimes
it can be an enjoyable experience.
Yes, like you get to that point. So like, how did it feel? Or did you guys ever have a point where you started to realize that like this is actually something that doesn't feel as easy to me as it once was, and now it's actually starting to weigh on me? Like, did you ever have a moment like that?
I mean, I'll let Will speak as well, but I mean, not till later, right? When I was deployed and in it, you flip that switch,
Oh, yeah.
right? And those of us who are do it long enough or are good at it, right? You have the box and you know what you lock in the box and when you let the certain things out of the box. And you know, when I was deployed, I loved it. It was, you're hanging out with some of the coolest people, you know, the biggest patriots. You're removing some very bad people so that they couldn't, you know, do bad things to people we cared about. But it wasn't until later on, you know, the Afghanistan retrograde, you know, I'm losing count of how many Iraq retrogrades we've done at this point. But that's when you start to think back and go, man, was it worth it? Did we do it for the right reasons? You know, that's where the, you know, the moral injury is really setting in, and we didn't know what moral injury was back then. I think we're still unpacking it. I've talked to Will's mom about it, you know, before when I've met her, and you know, we're still trying to figure it out. What we used to call PTSD, I think we're also calling moral injury now because we're better able to characterize it. I don't know, Will, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, so I my first deployment was different. That it was so bad because I was partnering with the Iraqi police. So I think it kind of just changed my entire worldview going forward because these guys were trying to kill me. And it wasn't like it was like kind of they were hiding it, right? They would like show me their Muqtada al-Sadr t-shirt underneath their uniform, right? And so I never felt bad about killing some of them when they were obviously not when they were in the IP uniform, but no, Al Qaeda, no. When I got to Afghanistan and I went through my first deployments there, I started liking it a lot. It got personal for me. It got real personal for me. And so like hunting guys, when you start hunting HVIs, and I know you've done that, and you start really hunting them, like you miss and maybe you lose people when you hunt them and stuff like that, it can get really personal. And when you kill them, incredibly satisfying. I mean, I don't care if you're in the top floor watching it on big screen, or you're, you know, whatever Navy SEAL that killed Bin Laden. I know they're all arguing over it. That pulled.
I heard your episode.
It was me.
Yeah, it was Kate. And so, like, there is still that rush of like, yes. And when I mention this to a lot of civilians, it's difficult because the idea is that you should have this like introspective moment where you're like, have I done that? That comes, right? But at first, most of the time, you're like, got him.
Yeah, and I had a very different experience than you because I spent, you know, the first part of my career flying in planes overhead, right? Yep. So I wasn't up close and personal in that aspect because to me, somebody had already told me they were bad guys. So my job was to find them, hunt them down, you know, and remove them. But you got personal even with those guys because you would watch them every day. You knew, you know, what red sneaker guy would wear, or you knew that they walked their kid to school on this day, but then they went to a bomb factory later in the day, right? So it became this weird thing where you could follow somebody for weeks on end, months on end, looking for that one opportunity that you could minimize the collateral damage and then you take them out. Satisfaction every time, but it also becomes a little bit of, wait a second, I'm watching him from above, but I know his family because I've watched him every day for months.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason I asked too is because, well, yes, I know that it's hard to talk about that topic with civilians who don't understand. I think one of the reasons we struggle is because we don't understand compartmentalizing as a survival strategy. And I think in the military, it absolutely is one of the most critical, right? So it's not necessarily that if you are in a different environment, you're one of those people who's just like, I enjoy this as a hobby. I think a lot of it is just, I'm in this environment and I need to find a way to get through it. And I don't think people realize how much that can alter your way of engaging with the world around you. And that's why I wanted to ask that question.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of narcissism, I think, in everybody who's done this long enough or was good at it.
Will.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, how do I say this? You keep on deploying into bad places and you keep on surviving it and you get better at it. It can lead to some interesting characteristic traits inside of you. Yeah. I mean, when you get to the point where like you're going into combat, I don't care if it's in a plane, or if you're in an MRAP going into a horrible valley, like if anybody who's played sports, especially if you played a contact sport and you put on all your gear and you're just like, there is that. And when you get to that point, it can get weird, especially when you start liking it so much. But one of the things that I kind of want to string out here is when we kind of move on to what you've been doing the last couple of years is when I came back from Afghanistan in 2021, and I was working at the group where Matt's working at, and I was a squadron commander. I had never been involved with a mission that it was going on stateside, right? I had never been involved with that type of the intelligence community, brand new for me. And so I had this preconceived notion, right, that I mean, it can't be that hard. You just you go to work, you type in the password or the 55,000 passwords, and then get onto your computer, and then easy day. But I learned very quickly after hanging out with some of my airmen for a while that because of our technology, they're able to see the war now too, up close, personal, in a high definition TV. And I was just curious, what is the military doing, or what has it done to try to combat that, and how has that changed since you've been in the seat? Yeah,
so there was a RAND study, I want to say it was late 2000s, that really looked at that, right? When we looked at all the folks who were watching, death TV or listening to it, and everybody just believed because you're thousands of miles away, it wasn't impacting you. But when they started looking at it, what they realized was when you deploy, you flip a switch and you're in deployment mode. What was going on with these airmen, and I'll speak from an airman's perspective, right? But it was happening with soldiers, sailors, Marines, was they were going into work for 10 to 12 hours doing this, killing bad guys, watching it. And then they were going home, and 30 minutes later, they're leaving Iraq, and they're sitting at home with a spouse who's saying, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? A screaming baby, or they're at their, little kid's soccer match. And we're discovering that because you couldn't flip that switch, it was actually almost a heavier burden on them because they didn't have the tools. They'd been told, like Will was, that what they were doing was so removed, it was going to be okay. We were actually destroying a whole generation without even realizing it, right? And so out of that study, and kind of modeled off of the SOF thing, SOF has the preservation of the force and family, which is really to get after these, how do we take care of our folks? The Air Force, and really specifically back then it was a FISRA, Lieutenant General Heithold, really stood up the Airmen Resiliency Teams that was really designed to give our airmen the tools to be resilient, to kind of get left of bang, to use the military colloquialism, right? And it was made up of 3 pillars, right? It was physical resiliency, it was mental resiliency, and it was spiritual resiliency. And those 3 pillars were really designed to help our folks deal with what they were seeing, what they were listening to process it. And, and resiliency isn't meaning you're not going to get knocked down, right? That's the biggest misnomer, is that we're going to get all these programs and everybody's resilient, so that's just going to be Teflon. Resiliency is that when you get knocked down, one, you recognize it, so you're willing to admit it, you're willing to talk to somebody, but you also have the tools to get back up again and get back in the fight when the time is right. And that's not always going to be immediately. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months, but that's really what the ART team was designed. So like our ART, I had a medical doc and a physician's assistant and 2 med techs. I had a psychologist and a psych assistant, and then I had a chaplain and a chaplain's assistant. And the cool thing about that program was there was nobody in charge of it, right? They didn't have one person commanding the whole thing. It was all 3 working synergistically. I think that's a big word that I can use.
It is a big word.
Write that
one down.
Look it up. Nailed it.
They were doing that Venn diagram, right? And so that was the beauty of it, is that by the 3 of them working together altruistically, they were able to, help our airmen recognize, what was going on. And at some point I went and saw our psych, right? Because, I realized that I can't be sitting here, and I think Will's in the same boat. I couldn't be sitting here telling my airmen to get help, or telling my airmen that it's okay, and then not doing it myself. And that comes and goes in waves. I think it was, Will, I think it was one of your articles that my wife got a hold of. I think she even emailed you on it and said, finally, thank you for saying what I've been experiencing and can't get my husband to listen to. And that was a gut punch. And I was like, oh, okay. Maybe my shit does stink as an 06 and, I'm not, I need to do some stuff. And so I started talking with them and taking advantage of their resources too, because none of us are immune to it. No rank is immune.
For sure.
Military specialty code is immune to it. The human psyche just processes things differently for each individual person.
Yeah.
Do you feel like when you first joined the service that it was the same tone about resilience and mental health and promoting it with people who are on active duty, or have you sort of seen a more open trend towards that as time has gone on and we sort of understood the impact of what was happening on service members?
It's 100% growing in the positive direction, right, from that experience. It used to be that only special operators or, the Army grunts on the ground, were the only ones who could have issues. Now we're realizing, like you guys said, that it's growing. But I also think we're encouraging people to get help, and we're removing the stigmas, which I think is the biggest thing. You got to remove the stigmas to get folks to have the help. When I had 350 flyers when I was stationed in Florida, and they were deploying 4 months home, 4 months gone, 4 months home. And they were doing that for years. Or they spoke languages and they were flying on the back of aircrafts and they were deployed more than they were home. And we were starting to break a whole generation. And so we started looking for creative ways to ask people to get help. And they weren't doing it at first. Here's all the tools, get help. They're like, yeah, right, boss. If I do that, you're going to remove my clearance. You're going to stop me from flying. You're going to stop all this. And, we had to look for creative ways to get that attention outside of the resourcing. And, I kind of call it the Goodwill Hunting analogy where, I started just making my folks go talk to the site when you in-process the unit, right? And then go talk to them when you got back. And it wasn't that they automatically started opening up, but eventually you just get bored staring at each other and you start talking and then you start connecting and then you open up, and so you see that growth. And you remove the stigma that, hey, you're not going to lose your clearance. You're not going to, that's the big one that always gets brought up. I'm going to lose my clearance. You're never going to lose your clearance, unless you're unwillingly hospitalized. And even then you're not losing it. I'm going to press pause, right, while we figure it out. And so that has been great. All the attention, the articles that people are writing about it, the people talk more openly about it, I think encourages people more and more to do that. And we as leaders, whether that's officer or enlisted or civilians, have to keep parroting the same thing. It's okay to be knocked down. It's okay to be struggling. I'd rather you ask about it than just sit there and try to deal with it yourself in the dark of the night with a bourbon in your hand.
Yeah. I think that a couple of things I want to kind of circle back a little bit and kind of talk about the Airmen Resiliency Team a little bit, because it's a really great program. And it wasn't until the tail end of my career that I saw it, with this, a doctor, a PA, a chaplain's assistant, a psychologist. And they're just incredible because they're part of the team. They're part of the unit. So they get to know everybody, right? They're organic to the group. And then they have the clearances to go see the airmen where they work, which is just critical because you got to go to them. And like for most of the mental health professionals, they don't have that clearance, which is just another barrier to get somebody to come somewhere. And if you can go to them, it's so much better. But I think that like what they were able to do, they do things. So when I lost an airman and I had to do the call and they came out, after I informed the formation, both, the psychologist and the chaplain's assistant, who has tons of like additional training, it's just not religious, but also in psychology and stuff like that, were right there, able to start having those conversations with people. And I just think it's a remarkable program, and I was really blown away with it. And I don't know, you're very lucky because I think that your art might be better than like some of the other ones.
They're the gold
really
standard.
Something. They're
the gold standard, right? And they're they're not just good at taking care of the airmen, like you said, by being seen, right? Because they're human, they can talk to folks, but they're willing to shut the door behind any one of us who's, outranks them and say, hey, how are you? Right? You're putting on the strong face. I lost an airman this Christmas time, and Will was still in uniform at the time. And they're the ones checking on us. Hey, boss, you're doing good, but you're taking care of everybody else who's taking care of you. And those are the crucial conversations we have to be able to have that I think, we just didn't used to do in the past because machismo got in the way.
Sure.
I want to ask, and it's a little bit invasive, Will, so if you don't want to answer it, that's totally fine. But I'm curious from both of you, and I know that you guys are close, so you probably had multiple conversations about how Will was feeling, but what was it like, Will, when you finally went to your commanding officer and you said, hey, I think I'm in trouble? Like, were you anxious? And then Colonel Norton, like, how did you receive that?
So when I talked to Matt about my problems, so I'm assuming that probably his predecessor might have given him a heads up because I told him a little bit.
Okay.
But I told him, so we had a moment. He came in June of, 2022, is that right? I think. And so about a month later, maybe 2 months later, 3 months later, I don't remember, I had a problem and I had forgotten about an airman's medical status. I just dropped the ball somewhere in the haze of Afghanistan and everything. I dropped the ball, and I told him, I was just like, "Yeah, that was me. I screwed up. Nobody else." And he asked, what was going on, and I was like, "I'm gonna be really honest with you. I'm having some problems with my memory." And it was at that point in time that I was having more cognitive problems. I couldn't remember when I had the conversation or what you were talking about, and I was losing track of things. So I had to really start telling people because they had to work with me, right? And so I was just like, screw it, I'm going to tell everybody so that way they can help me devise a way to be successful because I can't fail because I'm in charge of a bunch of people and I have to be open and honest so they can help me help them.
Yeah. I remember having those conversations with you, and you're right. My predecessor had given me a little bit of a heads up, but I didn't ask because it wasn't my story to tell. Right when you were ready and I'd earned your trust, you were going to open up on it. For me, that was going to wait and let it come out. But I remember when you were having those struggles, and I remember having the conversations when we were trying to decide if you were going to go back into Iraq again, right? And you're trying to figure out your future. And I remember those struggles, and I remember when you finally came to the conclusion that the FAO community had jerked you around enough, and we sat there and talked. We talked about Charity and your daughter, and everything that was going on. And I was like, and you were like, I can't go back, boss. And I was like, peace. He goes, I need to retire. I was like, peace. But I asked him one favor. Said, I need you to extend a year. Let me get you right before we give you back.
And so I just want to I've had the best transition. Nobody will have a better transition than me from the military to the civilian. I want to kind of underscore what Matt was able to do for me. It doesn't happen for most people. It just doesn't. I finished, I fainted basically. I collapsed after command more or less. And I went to intensive inpatient. Not only that, but then I went to outpatient at the traumatic brain injury clinic on Fort Eisenhower, which is very good. And then on top of that, Matt was able to find an NGO or a group to help pay for me to get a month of hyperbaric oxygen treatment. And then he was like, "You got three months. Try not to get in trouble. Here's a corner. Here's a computer. Don't do anything stupid." Which I didn't. So, and then I was able to, retire and ride for the Bulwark and stuff like that. So, when a lot of time people hear the military and they think, only the bad stuff comes out in the news where this commander didn't do something right. The way that Matt blocked and tackled for me is how every commander should block and tackle for not only lieutenant colonel, but all the way down to airmen, right? Because they're our national resource, and we have to be able to take care of them. And
there's somebody's mother, there's somebody's mom and dad, there's somebody's, child, They gave them to us in good shape. We deserve to give them back in as good a shape as we can.
That's exactly
right. So it's not just me. I think everybody should do that. I just was afforded the opportunity to do it the right way.
Yeah.
But I think it also speaks to that notion of integrity in the military, which is so important, right? Like mental health used to not be something that people would talk about. And I think that when we think about the military and its integrity, like this is what should be happening, but it's not still in a lot of ways. And that in full transparency is like why I was following you around Will's retirement ceremony, is because I work at VA and I know what it's like when somebody wants help and doesn't know how to get it. And I know what it's like when somebody wants help and they are discouraged from doing it. And I think it all goes back to, we promise our airmen that we're going to take care of them. And this is a really clear example of what it should look like. And then, just as somebody who loves Will, I don't think he would be who he is right now. He wouldn't be as functional. He wouldn't have access to the things that he does if you hadn't have been the leader that you were.
Functional.
Well,
Yeah.
he's doing his best.
It's a low bar.
I think, Will, that there was a chance you wouldn't still be here if you hadn't
I would tell you what, that it saved my marriage for sure, without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I was just being magnanimous. I was only doing it for Will. I mean, it was the right thing to do, and the situation was right. And I use it as an example now, and I can't get it. I can't get every single win that I want. Where I'm like, hey, don't retire straight out of this assignment, right? Skill bridge or extend a little bit, and let's try to get you the help you deserve. Sometimes people are in a hurry and they're ready to get out because they've got a plan or something. Okay, but Will trusted that we were going to do right by him, and we were able to do right by him. But even those moments are fleeting. I remember looking at Will's eyes when he came back, and he was great. But then October 7th happened, and I started looking at the same guy, and I remember having the conversation, Will, this one's not yours. You can't take this one.
Yeah, for sure. That's a true
conversation. Hopefully I'm not sharing too much, but I remember us having that talk.
Not at all. It was definitely a traumatic event for many Jews across the world, for sure. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the other program that you have, that you and Lieutenant Colonel, is it Marvin now? Is that what we're going by? Marvin Gaye. That's. I'm going to edit this out.
Longer story.
Let's talk. Longer story. We'll cut this out. It's a long
leave
story.
Leave it in and let people wonder. Let them wonder.
So let's talk about now. We'll change track a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about some of the programs that you and Marvin were able to put together.
The warrior mindset stuff.
The warrior mindset. Could you tell us a little bit about it? Because I think it's a great idea. It's amazing. Go ahead.
And I didn't come up with this. This was a grassroots thing. I was just able to block and tackle, fund it, and put some energy behind it. But when we started to look at, the news talks about the pivot to China. Everything's about China, Russia. And then we've still got this thing in the Middle East evidently going on. And we started to think about, as more and more frequently deployments aren't available, right? People aren't getting the same experiences Will and I had growing up, where you kind of got that battle-hardened skin. We're like, if we go to war with China in 2 years, 3 years, whenever it is, we've got a whole new generation that's never deployed and never fought this fight. How do we make them ready to fight it, right? Because a war with China is not going to look like a war in the Middle East. In my opinion, the death toll of two superpowers going to war with each other is going to pale in comparison to all the lives lost total, through the last 20 years. And so we're like, what is that young airman who grew up in the COVID generation? So they've already got a little bit different, resiliency skill set. And so we started looking at what can we do? So, one of the first things we did was moral injury training, where, the slides are unclassified, right? I think I've got them sitting right here on my desk. But the conversation is at the top secret level. We bring them into the skiff with the docs, the chaplain, and they sit there and they talk about what is moral injury. Hey, when you're doing your job, you may be asked to do things that you can't process because it goes conflicting to your values, or you're going to hear things, see things that you're not going to understand. And that's okay. Here's what that means. And here's how to deal with it. Here's how to recognize it in your brother or sister who's sitting next to you. on the line, that kind of stuff. And so that moral injury training gives that first foundation of what that looks like. And now we've gone backwards with it, where we're starting it at tech school. We're starting at other places to build that resilience up. We also started doing some of these warrior retreats where we did, the ropes courses, the high altitude courses where you're learning trust. You're learning, here's fear, here's what it feels like, so you understand that sensation and can either go get past it, or you recognize what it is and you know when to back off, with that fight or flight mentality. And as part of that, we started also giving those same, 3 pillars of resiliency at those events. And then we had sessions where we brought in enlisted to talk about their deployments. I remember Marvin, Will, and I doing one of the last ones together where we each told our deployed experiences and the losses, so that the first time they're hearing about it isn't going to be years later. And we let them ask questions, and they were talking about, how'd you get through it? What'd you do? And almost to a T, all 3 of us admitted we did it wrong at the time. Right now, looking back, we probably do different things because we have the tools, we recognize stuff. But that warrior mindset is, trying to look at how do we create that next generation that this nation in an all volunteer force is going to need if we're going to go toe to toe with China or toe to toe with Russia. Right now, we're using proxies. That may not always be the case. And, how do we, get those folks ready to do it so that we don't break them and then try to build them back, which is what we did in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important point, though, which is that when you're talking about resilience, it's not just about being responsive to when somebody's needs have already arisen, but it's about, how do we set them up to not have to fall so hard? Will, do you think that your service would have been different if they had those programs in the beginning? Do you think that you would have felt differently about some of the situations you found yourself in?
I don't know.
I'm saying no.
I'm hitting you with some hard questions, buddy. I'm sorry.
I don't know. No, it's a good question. I don't think so. I don't know.
Because your experience was different, Will.
It was different. I was, my first deployment was the bombs, and we're responding to car bombs and assassinations and all. The worst. It was everything you thought of when you think of Iraq. For me, 2006 Baghdad, Civil War, in the middle of it, trying to pick sides and trying to navigate moral landmines at every step. Do I partner with this guy? Should I like this guy? He's pretty cool. I like to smoke cigarettes with him, even though he's, mass murder. It seems like he might protect me.
It's funny.
He is funny. Some of the funniest people I've ever met have done some horrible shit. But yeah, I don't know. I think that I would have liked to have had some type of understanding of what it was going to do to me, right? You're going to see some shit downrange. It's going to fuck you up, man. And try not to do these things, which is come back home and just play a game called Drink Your Face Off, right? See what happens. Maybe that'll turn out well. Probably not. And stuff like that, or you're going to get into probably you and your wife, your husband or whatever are going to have problems because they're not going to know how to talk to you about it because you haven't had that. Would it have made a difference? I don't know, but I would have liked to have known that. And I would tell you that in the early parts of the military, I'll remember this. I came back from my second deployment. It was the first one in Afghanistan. It was pretty bad. Lost a couple of guys, IEDs. And I came back and the 06 who was in charge of me, I was having a hard time at his group staff meeting. He called me out on it in the middle of the staff meeting. True story. And was what's wrong with you? You shaken? That happened. And when you have stuff like that as a young officer, right? That just reinforces bury that deep, seal it off. Don't ever show any weakness. Yeah. But
it's changed. You probably hadn't deployed yet.
Right. But nowadays, are there some of old school gals like that around still? Of course. But I think we're getting more and more type of people, and not just because they're just great human beings, but because they have to be that way if they want to keep people in. You have to teach them how to be resilient. Because if not, either they're going to just burn out, or they're going to be like, this stuff is not for me and I want out. And we can't do that nowadays.
But well, even if it hadn't changed necessarily your deployment, one, maybe that colonel wouldn't have been an asshole, right?
Sure.
Step one, as my wife tells me every day, don't be an asshole. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose.
The daily battle.
But then your friends also would have known, hey, bud, hey, Will, you're not looking so good. Hey, let's not do the drink yourself stupid in the middle of the night.
Right.
And call your buddies or, blah, blah, blah. Other people would have had the tools. So even if we didn't necessarily change you, the network would have been better.
Yeah. It would have been. It took us a while, but I think on this front, on the mental health front, I think that it's come so far. It's not the same military.
We've got a long ways to go, though.
Yes, we do. A long way.
The reason why it's so prevalent in my mind is because I spend 50, 60 hours a week reading about all the ways in which military service hurt people. And it hurts me every week to hear these stories about people who served and said, I knew that I was having a problem, but I was told that was what it meant to be a soldier, and that I didn't have access to help. And so these conversations, to me, they're not just refreshing, they make me feel hopeful for the future generation. Like I cannot stress enough the impact of what you're doing, because as someone who has seen how this sort of led through the Vietnam veteran, it makes me feel hopeful for the first time. Okay. And that's why I'm delighted by this episode.
We've made a lot of mistakes, but hopefully, we're getting better, right?
Yeah.
We owe it to the sons and daughters, the mothers and fathers to do it, because, as you guys have talked about in other episodes, we're an all volunteer force, and that message is declining. And I think that's because too many times we've given people back broken by getting them the help that they need. Sometimes that's their own fault, right?
Sure, 100%.
Yeah.
Some people won't get the help they need, but I can lead the horse to water. Sometimes I can hold his head under there, but not for the whole time.
Yeah, I understand. So I just want to kind of broach one last subject, and we might, just one idea here. I want to talk a little bit about what might exacerbate some of these mental health problems, right? That leads people to kind of like not go and then have to go. One of the things, this is a pet theory of mine, and I might be wrong. I think that one of the side effects of overclassification in the IC and in the military at large is that it breeds this culture of that since almost everything that you can think of in your brain is probably classified by somebody, you start to think that everything you do when you walk in that door or you're doing might be classified. And so somebody can tell you, like, don't do it, you're fine. But it's like, everything I know is this way. And I think that it really hurts the IC and then a lot of other people too, because it keeps them from talking about the things that they see. And a lot of it you can talk around, right? But I think that as leaders, we have to be able to start making those decisions to lower the classification level, because it's causing too many mental health issues. I don't know. What do y'all think? Am I wrong? I'm wrong a lot. So that's what my wife says.
I agree with you, right? Not everything has to be classified. And, I joke that at this point in my career, I'm a walking security violation most of the time. It's not just that we compartmentalize it, but then we don't tell our spouses. We're like, I can't tell you what I do. Right. And I hear that all the time from the spouses when I mean with them. They're like, well, my significant other won't tell me what they do. I'm like, well, your husband or your wife speaks Arabic and we live in location X, or you're flying on a plane. I'm guessing you're not listening to Arabic in the plane or in location X. Right. And so I'm like, it's not too hard to piece this together and say, okay, this is what I did, But you're right. We're so worried that somebody's going to let a secret out that we berate them from day one to overclassify and don't talk about it. Well, that's bullshit, in my opinion. I will tell people all day long what what folks do, because it's not that complicated. And we have to be able to talk about it, right? Don't tell me the methodologies. Don't tell me the tools you used, but you can tell me some of the things you did. It's okay.
I think it also adds to that narcissism, Will, that you were sort of talking about before, which is like, oh, I'm dealing with such important, critical information, and I have to protect it as best I can. I'm very important. And so that means that I can't really get the help that I need.
But that's why that embedded doc with a TS clearance is so important.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. I'll end it on this little statement, and I used to tell this to everybody. I'm telling it to everybody that listens to the podcast. Look, you can go get help, and it's not going to hurt your clearance. You're going to be totally fine. It's like the smallest percentage in the world that will. But here's the real truth. Even if it didn't, even if you might get in trouble, your mental health is more important than some freaking clearance. And your mental health and the mental health of your family and your whole around it is more important than some job. It just is. And if you're not taking care of yourself, then you can't take care of other people. And that's what we have to be. But I just want to thank you so much, Matt, for coming.
Wait, can I ask one more question?
Okay, fine. Go ahead, Kate.
My time is
Shut up,
time.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Right.
But it feels really important. It feels important because one of the things that Colonel Norton, you were talking about before was the people who, what's it called? Deployed in place?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. And then, so you're like at work for 12 hours and you're doing, your military activity, and then you have to go home to your family. So you can't really talk about it and you can't necessarily like pull yourself out of it. Is there any sort of resilience programming that engages the families as well?
Yeah, there are. The ART for us puts on couples retreats, right? Where we take the whole family, including some childcare, and, we have some of these crucial conversations, right? So there are tools available. Sometimes they're not as well known. We have the military family life counselors whose whole job is to be able to do that and talk to spouses, at the unclassified level, the Military Family Readiness Center. Those tools are available to spouses if they want to take advantage of them. But I also just think having these conversations in front of them drives them to now confront their spouse, right? And my spouse is more than once, and just like Charity, has been more than willing to bring me down a peg and have a talk about, how I'm either compartmentalizing or how I'm not talking about it or how I'm using the wrong tools to deal with things. So yeah, there are, and we got to get more of that because this is a family adventure, right? I couldn't do it without my wife. And if she's not alongside of me, and I tell this to airmen all the time, if you spend your entire career jobbing it and ignoring your family and you come screeching across that finish line at a 20-year career and your family's not with you, you've done something wrong. It's not worth sacrificing your family because at the end of the day, I've got all these great medals and great stories, but who am I telling them to? Who's looking at it and wants to put up with my bullshit?
Mm-hmm. It's important though. I mean, the reason I struggled the hardest in the volunteer work was not because of the work I was doing with Afghans. It was because, and I'm not a military spouse, but I had so many people coming to me and talking about things in ways they weren't engaging the tools that necessarily were going to help us. And at the end of it, I felt buried and I couldn't do the work anymore. And so I think, when we talk about those support systems, we need to make sure that they have a support system. Support the supporters.
It's a team sport.
There you go. Well, can I close it now?
Yeah, thank you, Will. I appreciate it.
Okay. You're welcome. So, no, thanks a lot, Matt, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. You're off to bigger and better things in your career, and I, along with Kate, will be rooting for you every step of the way. Matt is about to do a change of command, so I'm going to embarrass him here. The best officer I've ever served under. It's not even close. He is the best officer I've ever served under, and one of the best leaders I've ever seen. So the Air Force, in its infinite wisdom, has gotten it right, and it's going to give him some more roles and responsibilities. That's all I'll say. But I am so proud to call you my friend, and thank you so much for coming.
I wasn't invited to the change of command, but I will be there.
Challenge accepted.
I feel like you deserve to have me in the audience.
And make sure I know ahead of time so I can make sure to call you out.
No problem. Call me out. acknowledge my contributions.
I appreciate you guys having me on. Keep doing this, right? It's reaching people. The articles, the podcasts, we've got to get these stories out there to reach people, to get the help, and you guys are drawing attention to it. I'm only able to lead because people like you inspire me, but you're also helping, do this. So thanks for the kind words, Will. I think you're blowing smoke up my butt. That I guess you're probably just trying to say you're not paying me for this episode, and that was my payment.
We are not.
Damn it. That's the reason I went long. I thought I was getting paid by the minute.
The lawyer says we are not.
I thought I was getting paid by the minute. That's why I kept talking.
That's why I kept asking questions.
There you go. Well, all right. Well, thank you so much, all of our listeners. Do me a favor, if you go ahead, subscribe, give us 5 stars, share the podcast with people so we can continue to do this great work. And until next time. Bye, Kate. Love you.
Bye. Love you.